You could spend your entire life trying to figure out if your parents were narcissists. You could read dozens of books, watch hundreds of videos, make lists of behaviors, and still be left with doubt. But there's a shortcut. Two things. Just two. If these two things were present in your childhood, you have your answer. And that answer, as painful as it might be, is the first step toward understanding everything that happened to you. Carl Jung spent decades studying the dynamics between parents and children. He observed families, treated patients, and identified patterns that repeated with frightening accuracy. And at the center of it all, he found these two characteristics that define narcissistic parenting: not isolated behaviors, not moments of anger or stress. Two fundamental structures that, when present together, reveal the truth about who raised you. The first thing is what Jung called role reversal, and the second is the absence of psychological space, or emotional breathing room. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to explain exactly what each one means, how to identify if they were present in your childhood, and why the combination of the two is the unmistakable signature of narcissistic parents. But before we get into that, I need you to understand something crucial. Many behaviors that seem narcissistic are actually reactions to stress, trauma, or simply a lack of parenting skills. A parent can yell and not be a narcissist. A mum can be critical and not be a narcissist. What differentiates narcissistic parenting isn't isolated actions, it's permanent structures, patterns that define the entire relationship, not moments of failure. Keep that in mind, because it'll make sense when we talk about these two things. The first thing is role reversal. Jung observed that in healthy families, there's a natural hierarchy. Parents take care, children are cared for. Parents give, children receive. Parents regulate emotions. Children learn to self-regulate through that model. In narcissistic families, that hierarchy is reversed. The child becomes responsible for the emotional well-being of the parents. The son starts taking care. The daughter starts regulating. The child assumes a role that should never have been theirs. This might seem subtle. It might even look positive from the outside. What a mature child. What a responsible son. What a caring daughter. But behind that appearance of maturity, there's a tragedy. A child who had to abandon their own childhood to serve the emotional needs of the people who should have been serving theirs. Let me give you concrete examples. Emily was 8 years old when her mom started talking to her about her marital problems. Her mom would sit in Emily's room, cry, and recount details about the fights with her dad. Emily would listen, offer comfort, try to give advice. At 8 years old, she became her own mother's therapist. That's role reversal. The mother should have been offering emotional security to Emily. Instead, she was draining Emily's security to supply her own needs. Michael was 10 years old when his dad lost his job. From that moment on, Michael felt it was his responsibility to keep his dad happy. If his dad was sad, Michael had failed. If his dad was angry, Michael needed to fix it. He constantly monitored his dad's mood and adjusted his own behavior to avoid making things worse. That's role reversal. Michael was no longer a child entitled to his own emotions. He became an emotional regulator for an adult. Ashley was 6 years old when she realized that if she didn't organize the house, no one would. Her mum would spend days in bed. Her dad worked and ignored the chaos. Ashley started cleaning, making simple meals, taking care of her younger brother. She was praised for being so independent. That's role reversal. Ashley wasn't independent. She was an emotionally abandoned child who took on parental functions to survive. Jung identified that this reversal doesn't happen by accident. It happens because narcissistic parents have a fundamental inability to see their children as separate beings, with their own needs. For the narcissist, children exist to serve and to regulate and to mirror, to complete what's missing in the father or the mother, And here's the most cruel aspect. The child who assumes this reversed role usually doesn't realize that something is wrong. They think that's how families work. They think their job is to take care of their parents. They internalize it as identity. I am the responsible one. I am the caregiver. I exist to serve. This false identity, built on role reversal, persists in adulthood. These are the people who always take care of others, but never allow anyone to take care of them, who feel guilty for having needs, who attract partners who need to be saved. The role reversal of childhood becomes a life pattern. Let me show you how to identify if role reversal was present in your childhood. There are specific questions that reveal the truth. Did you know the details of your parents' problems? Financial problems, marital problems, and emotional health problems? If you knew, who told you? Children shouldn't know details of adult problems. If you knew, someone reversed the role and treated you as a confidant. Did you feel responsible for your parents' mood? If your dad came home angry, did you feel it was your fault? If your mom was sad, did you feel you needed to fix it? Children aren't responsible for their parents' emotions. If you felt that responsibility, someone reversed the role and made you an emotional regulator. Were you afraid to be a child? Afraid to make noise? To have demands? To need attention? Did you feel that being a child was a burden to your parents? If so, someone reversed the role and made you feel that your natural needs were problems. Were you praised for being mature, independent, responsible? These compliments seemed positive, but they hid a tragedy. You weren't mature by nature. You were forced to mature because no one was available to take care of you. Ethan remembers that at 12 years old, he already knew how to manage the house. He knew when the bills were due. He knew when he had to buy food. He knew how to calm his mom during her anxiety attacks. Everyone said, "What a responsible child." But Ethan wasn't responsible by choice. He was responsible by abandonment. No one else was taking care, so he needed to take care. Sarah remembers that her mom called her "my best friend." That seemed like a compliment. But mothers and daughters aren't best friends. They're mother and daughter. Friendship implies equality. The parental relationship implies hierarchy. When the mom transformed Sarah into her best friend, she erased the hierarchy and placed a 9-year-old child in the role of an adult. These are the hallmarks of role reversal. Subtle enough to seem normal. Profound enough to shape an entire life. Now let's move on to the second thing. The absence of psychological space. Carl Jung spoke about the need for individuation, the process by which a person becomes a separate individual with their own thoughts, feelings, desires, and identity. For this to happen, a child needs space. Space to explore who they are. Space to have emotions that are truly their own. Space to disagree, to want different things, to be a person separate from their parents in narcissistic families. This space simply doesn't exist. The child isn't allowed to have their own emotions. If they're sad when mom is happy, that's a problem. If they're happy when dad is sad, that's an offense. The child's emotions must always align with the parent's emotions. The child isn't allowed to have their own opinions. If they disagree, they're being disrespectful. If they question, they're being ungrateful. If they want something different from what the parents want, they're being selfish. The child isn't allowed to have boundaries. Their room can be invaded at any moment. Their conversations can be eavesdropped on. Their thoughts should be shared. Privacy is treated as rejection. Michael remembers that he wasn't allowed to close his bedroom door. His mom said that closed doors meant he was hiding something. At 14 years old, he didn't have a space that was solely his. His room was his mom's. His thoughts were his mom's. His life was an extension of his mom's life. Ashley remembers that any emotion she had was commented on, analyzed, corrected. If she was quiet, what's wrong? If she was cheerful, why are you so happy? If she cried, stop being so dramatic. She learned that her emotions didn't belong to her. They belonged to her parents to be judged. Ethan remembers that his achievements were never about him. When he got good grades, it was because his parents were good parents. When he did something wrong, it was a shame for the family. He existed as a reflection, as an extension, as an advertisement for parental excellence. This absence of psychological space is devastating because it prevents the development of the self. Carl Jung used that word with a capital S to signify the true core of personality. The self needs space to emerge when that space doesn't exist. The child develops what Carl Jung called a false self, a persona constructed to please the parents, but that doesn't represent who the person really is, and that's the tragedy. Many people raised by narcissists reach adulthood without knowing who they are. They know what their parents wanted them to be. They know what was expected of them. They know how to please, how to serve on, how to conform. But they don't know who they are when no one is looking, because they never had space to find out. Let me show you how to identify if the absence of psychological space was present in your childhood. Just like with role reversal, there are revealing questions. Were you allowed to have secrets? Not dangerous secrets, but normal kid secrets. A diary that no one read. Thoughts that were just yours. Friends that your parents didn't know in detail. If not, your psychological space was being invaded. Were you allowed to disagree with your parents? Not about big things, but about small things. Musical preferences, choice of clothing, opinion about a movie. If every disagreement was treated as disrespect or rebellion, you weren't allowed to be a separate person. Were you allowed to have emotions different from your parents? Could you be sad when they were happy? Could you be excited when they were tired? If your emotions always had to mirror theirs, you had no space for your own feelings. Were you allowed to fail? Not big failures, but normal failures. Getting a bad grade, losing a game, not being perfect. If every failure was treated as family shame or proof that you were inadequate, you had no space to be human. Emily remembers that she couldn't like things that her mom didn't like. If Emily showed interest in something that her mom considered silly, she was ridiculed. If she liked a song that her mom thought was ugly, she was criticized. Slowly, Emily stopped knowing what she liked because her tastes had to be her mom's tastes. Michael remembers that any achievement of his was immediately appropriated. When he got into college, his mom posted on social media, "My son got in, I managed to raise a winner." Michael's achievement became his mom's achievement. He wasn't allowed to be the protagonist of his own story. Sarah remembers that her thoughts were read without permission. Her mom rummaged through her room, read her messages, interrogated her friends. Any attempt at privacy was treated as betrayal. "Are you hiding something from me?" Sarah learned that she had no right to an inner world. These are signs of the absence of psychological space. An invasion so constant that it seems normal. A colonization so complete that the victim doesn't realize they've been colonized. Now comes the crucial part. Why are these two things together so important? Many families have some degree of role reversal. Children in poor families often take on responsibilities beyond their age. Children of sick parents may become caregivers. This is sad, but it's not necessarily narcissism. Many families have problems with psychological space. Anxious parents can be invasive. Controlling parents may have difficulty with their children's autonomy. This is problematic, but it's not necessarily narcissism. What defines narcissistic parenting is the combination. Role reversal happens because the narcissist needs the child to serve their emotional needs. The absence of psychological space happens because the narcissist can't see the child as a separate being. The two things come from the same root. The inability of the parent to recognize the child as a person with their own existence, and that's why these two things together are so revealing. They aren't behaviors, they are structures. They are the way the entire relationship was organized. And when you recognize that both were present, you understand the architecture of your childhood. Each video like this demands deep research into Jungian psychology and narcissistic family dynamics. It demands the ability to translate complex concepts into language that resonates with real experiences. It demands the commitment to bring light to wounds that most prefer to keep in the dark. The super thanks down there isn't just financial support. It's you saying that this type of content matters. It's you recognizing that understanding what happened is the first step to healing. Just when you click on that golden heart, you participate in something bigger, a community of people who have chosen to stop blaming themselves and start understanding. Getting back to what really matters. If you're listening to this and recognizing your own childhood, some things are probably running through your head right now. Maybe you're thinking it wasn't that bad, that your parents had their own problems, but they did the best they could, that you're exaggerating. This is a common reaction. It's a defense mechanism. A child's brain needs to believe their parents are good because they depend on them to survive. This belief can persist into adulthood, even when the evidence contradicts it. Maybe you're thinking about specific situations, moments where the role reversal was obvious, moments where your psychological space was invaded. It's possible that these memories are coming back with new clarity. This can be painful, but it can also be liberating, because finally you have a lens to understand what happened. Maybe you're thinking about your own children, if you have them. Am I repeating the pattern? Am I doing to them what was done to me? This question is important, and the awareness of this possibility is already a step toward change. Narcissists don't ask this question. The fact that you are asking suggests you have the capacity to choose differently. Carl Jung deeply believed in the generational transmission of patterns. What isn't brought to consciousness repeats itself. Children of narcissistic parents are more likely to become narcissists or to get involved in relationships with narcissists. Not because it's destiny, but because it's what they know. It's what was modeled. It's what feels familiar, even when it's destructive. But Carl Jung also believed in individuation, in the process of becoming who you really are, separate from the projections and expectations of your parents. This process is possible. It's difficult, it's painful, but it is possible. The first step is acknowledgement, seeing the role reversal for what it was, seeing the absence of psychological space for what it was, stopping the normalization of what was not normal, stopping defending your parents at the cost of your own truth. This doesn't mean hating your parents. Many narcissistic parents were themselves children without emotional breathing room, forced into role reversals. They passed on what they received. Understanding this can bring compassion, but compassion doesn't mean denial. You can have compassion for your parents and still recognize the damage they caused. The second step is grief. You need to mourn the childhood you should have had, the child who should have been cared for and not the caregiver, the psychological space that should have existed for you to discover who you were, the self that should have been allowed to emerge. This grief may seem strange. How do you mourn something that never existed? But that's exactly what needs to be mourned. The absence, the emptiness. What should have been and wasn't. Sarah spent months in therapy crying, not for things that happened, but for things that didn't happen, for the comfort she didn't receive, for the permission to be a child she didn't have, for the space to simply exist that was never given. Each tear was recognition of a loss she had denied her entire life. The third step is reconstruction, learning to occupy psychological space, learning to have emotions that are yours, learning to have needs without guilt, learning to exist for yourself, and not just to serve others. This is scary because it's uncharted territory. The child who always took care of others doesn't know what it's like to be taken care of. The child who never had psychological space doesn't know how to occupy it. Every step toward individuation can trigger anxiety, guilt, fear. But these feelings don't mean you're doing something wrong. They mean you're doing something new. And the new always scares you at first. Ethan started slowly. First, he learned to identify what he was feeling. This seems basic, but for him, it was revolutionary. His whole life he monitored his parents' feelings. He was never allowed to monitor his own. Then he started saying no. Small no's at first. No, I can't help this weekend. No, I don't want to go to that event. Each no triggered guilt. But he persisted. And over time, the guilt decreased. And his psychological space increased. Ashley began to notice when she was entering into role reversals in her relationships, when she was caring too much, when she was negating herself to regulate the other person. Each time she noticed, she had a choice. She could continue on autopilot, or she could stop and ask, "What do I need now?" These changes seem small, but they are enormous. Each time you choose to have psychological space, you challenge the programming. Each time you refuse to reverse roles, you break the pattern. Each time you exist for yourself, you take a step toward the self that was never allowed to emerge. There's something Carl Jung called the transcendent function. It's the psyche's ability to integrate opposites, to find a third way between two forces that seem irreconcilable. And in the context of healing from narcissistic childhoods, the transcendent function operates in a powerful way. On one hand, there's loyalty to your parents, the love you feel despite everything, the gratitude for them raising you, but even if poorly, the fear of betraying the people who gave you life. On the other hand, there's the truth, the acknowledgement that something was wrong, the pain you carry, the anger that perhaps was never allowed. The transcendent function doesn't choose a side. It finds a synthesis. You can love your parents and recognize they were narcissistic. You can have gratitude for certain things and anger for others. You can honor what they tried to do and mourn what they actually did. Emily struggled with this for years. She felt she needed to choose, either defend her parents and deny the pain, or acknowledge the pain and condemn her parents. It seemed impossible to do both, but over time, she found the third way. A position where she could say, "My parents loved me the way they knew how, and that way hurt me deeply." Both things were true at the same time. This synthesis is liberating, because you no longer have to divide your reality. You no longer have to deny half of the experience to validate the other half. You can embrace the complexity, the ambivalence, the uncomfortable truth that people who love us can also destroy us. There's also what Carl Jung called synchronicity in healing. When you start working consciously on these patterns, the world seems to respond. You find a book that speaks exactly to your experience. A casual conversation reveals that a friend went through the same thing. A therapist appears at the right time. It's not magic, it's attention. When you're aware of something, you notice things that were always there, but were invisible. Michael says that after recognizing the role reversal with his mother, he started to notice the pattern everywhere. He saw friends doing the same with their parents. He was shocked, witnessing colleagues stepping into caregiving roles where they absolutely shouldn't. It was like I had gained entirely new eyes, and those new eyes allowed me to choose differently. Healing isn't linear, folks. Some days you'll feel free. Other days those old patterns will come back with a vengeance. There are moments of clarity and moments of utter confusion, steps forward and steps back. This doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human, and your psyche. It operates on its own timeline. Carl Jung wrote that individuation isn't some final destination. It's a continuous process. You don't just wake up one morning, bam, completely individuated, free from all projections and patterns. But you can wake up each day a little more conscious, a little more present, a little more you. There's a Jungian concept called the constellated self. When you work on healing, when you recognize those patterns and start choosing differently, something begins to form in the very center of your psyche. The true self, the one that was prevented from emerging in childhood, that finally starts to take shape. Not all at once, mind you, not completely, but gradually, like an image slowly developing in a dark room. You might not even know who you truly are yet. If you've spent your entire life serving your parents, molding yourself to their expectations, existing as an extension of them and not as an individual, your true self may still feel like a complete mystery. But that mystery can be uncovered. Each moment of authenticity reveals another piece of the puzzle. Every choice you make based on your own internal compass, not their programming, adds a little more clarity. The two things that reveal narcissistic parents are also the two things that you have the power to reverse. If your parents engaged in role reversal, you can learn to receive care. If they didn't give you any psychological space, any emotional breathing room, you can create that space now. What was denied to you as a child can be cultivated as an adult. It's not easy. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is possible. And the very fact that you're here, listening to this, seeking to understand, that's already a huge sign that the process has begun. You're doing what your parents probably never did. You're questioning. You're seeking awareness. You're choosing to see the truth instead of perpetuating denial. That takes courage. That's the beginning of healing. That's the first step toward becoming who you were always meant to be. Role reversal robbed you of your childhood. The absence of emotional space robbed you of yourself. But you can reclaim what was stolen. Not by going back in time, because sadly that's impossible, but by giving yourself now what you should have received then: care, space, permission to exist. And here's something Carl Jung himself might say: the destiny you didn't choose can be transformed into your path. The childhood you didn't ask for can become the root of profound understanding. The wounds you carry, they can become a source of deep wisdom. Many therapists, writers, and healers today are survivors of narcissistic childhoods. They transformed their pain into purpose, their wound into a portal. What was done to them became their vocation to help others. You don't have to become a therapist to transform your experience. But you can use what you've learned. You can recognize the patterns in others and offer understanding and empathy. You can be the parent to your own children, if you have them, that you needed. You can break the generational chain and say, this ends here. And that power to end cycles. That's perhaps the greatest healing of all, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after you. Role reversal and the absence of emotional space. Those are the two telltale signs, the two signatures of narcissistic parenting. If both of those things were present in your childhood, now you know. And knowing is power. The power to choose differently. The power to heal. The power to finally become who you always were. Before your parents' eyes told you who you should be, write in the comments which of those two things was the most present in your childhood: role reversal, or the absence of emotional space, or if it was both. Sharing that might seem like a small thing, but it's an act of acknowledgement. And it's you saying aloud what you may have never said before. It's the beginning of occupying the space that was always rightfully yours.